going to address the biggest concerns and questions that I had going into having my babies in a hospital, and how they were handled in my situation, and just the research that I did, and preparation and things like that. So for me, I felt very strongly about not having an IV. While I was giving birth and laboring, for me personally, I don't like having that needle in my hand or my arm or wherever they put it. For me, I didn't feel like it was necessary. I had been sipping water, throughout, and that was just fine. I didn't need it, or didn't feel like I was going to need it. So I requested to not have an IV of saline, I think is what they're putting in you. I'm not even positive, but I'm pretty sure it's saline. So that's something I talked with my doctors about beforehand. In most cases, I think they don't require you to have the saline, obviously, unless something happens to where it's completely necessary. With Ember, I didn't even have to have the needle in. Eventually, they did talk me into putting it in as I was further into my labor, just because in case of an emergency. So I did reluctantly put the needle in, but it was capped off the whole time. They never actually used it. With IV at the hospital I gave birth at, they required you to have the needle in, capped off, no matter what. Like as soon as you got there and they were checking you in, they put the, I think it's called a HEP lock, the HEP lock. They put that on you, but I didn't have to have anything in it unless it was necessary. And of course I did have the IV of antibiotics for group B strep for IV. So that was how the IV was handled in my situation. I just feel like when you're hooked up to an IV, and this is all just where I'm coming from and how I feel about it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong or right for you or for everybody else, but there's things that I think about it. For me, just the idea of having that needle in me, and just like, what if it gets caught on something or hurts my hand, or I didn't like having that burden mentally while I was trying to focus on what I needed to do. Also, just being hooked up to an IV, obviously you got the tube there, you're much more limited as far as moving around and things like that. And I just associate that too with like, oh, I have an IV and I must be sick. Like, it just gives me an icky feeling. Even though it can have healing properties, if the saline, if your body needs it, then sure, it's good for you. But for me, that's kind of where I was coming and why I did not want the IV. Another concern that I had going into it was, will I be able to have a labor tub if I need it for the pain, or can I even give birth in the water? Most hospitals, well, I shouldn't say most. It's kind of hit or miss. You have to do your research. Some hospitals have labor tubs, some don't. My first one, I had a labor tub. My second one, I did not. But oddly enough, the second one, I didn't really even think or feel like I needed that anyways. So sometimes you might think, oh, I want to labor in the water, but then when it comes to it, you don't need to or even want to. And most hospitals will not let you give birth in the water. I did find one hospital in New York where we lived that specialized in that, but they were too far away. I couldn't give birth there. So some do, some don't. Most won't let you give birth in the tub though. You can just use it to help with the pain. Also, I was always just concerned about, will I be able to walk around or move around, or will I be stuck to a monitor the whole time? In both cases for me, I had to be put on the monitor like every hour or so for like 10-20 minutes, I forget exactly. But when I was not on the monitor, I was free to walk about and move around as I pleased. It's not ideal. I think I would have preferred to not have to, sit down and get in the bed and be on the monitor every hour. And then when I did use the tub, they had a Doppler that they could check me that way. So I don't know. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't terrible. I still, for the most part, could move around a lot, which is so essential for having a natural birth. For Ember, they kind of like act like they're open to it, but then when it comes down to it, they really just want you to be in the bed. So like with Ember, I did try squatting once, but they like wouldn't let me get off the bed, so I was squatting on the bed, which just didn't work. It was awkward, and I just ended up giving birth, you know, kind of sitting up, and things like that. So I don't know, like hospitals, they say, yeah, you know, we can see, they're kind of like, well, we'll just see what happens when it gets to that point. But in the moment, they kind of just, I just got the vibe that they really, really want you to be on the bed. And same with Ivy, I gave birth on the bed as well. But I will say though, in those moments, the position that they had me do felt fine, as long as you're not on your back, straight on your back. That I felt was just the worst thing ever. Especially when you're contracting. The worst place to be when you're having a contraction is just laying flat on your back. Especially also for me too, I don't think I mentioned this, for both girls, I had back labor. I did not have, I don't know what the normal labor is where you feel it in mostly in your abdomen. I felt it all primarily in my back, and I've been told that that is much more intense and more painful. I don't know, I don't have a frame of reference. That's the only kind of labor I've ever had, was back labor. So especially for me, just being on my back was not an option whatsoever. There was one point where they were checking me, and a contraction was coming, and I'm like, you gotta let me sit up or I will die. Like, so just sitting up helps to kind of relieve that. In preparation for actually giving birth, there are things that you can do that I did that I feel helped. I do think it is important to do your research to basically get as much knowledge as you can. I did a lot of reading, watching YouTube videos. If you can find a hospital with midwives, that is ideal. I did not have those options. With Ivy, I saw a midwife for my prenatal checkups, and it was hoped that she would be at the birth, but it was one of those things where if she wasn't available, I had to have a doctor, and that's what happened. I ended up with a doctor, so both my births were with a doctor. Talk to your doctor. That is a huge, totally important thing. Just ask them the questions that you're concerned about, and just share with them what you want to do, and that you feel strongly about it. I did not have birth plans for either one. I typed it up for Ember, but I ended up not giving it to anybody because I felt like that was almost too, I don't know what the word is. It's almost like I didn't want to jinx myself. It's a fine line, because if you want to have an unmedicated birth, you have to want it very, very bad because it's very intense, it's very painful. You have to want it, but you also have to let yourself be open to the possibility that you might need an intervention or something like that. You almost hurt yourself more if you focus too much on, this is what I want, this is what I want. You're tensing up your body, you're getting yourself all hyped up, and that is just the enemy of an unmedicated birth, is being tense and hyped up and trying to control too much. It's not going to help you. So for me, I didn't feel like I needed a birth plan, but of course that's up to the individual. As far as preparing physically, like I said, I was very physically active with the first one. With the second one, not so much, because I had a toddler. I felt like that was enough, and honestly, since I had already given birth once before, I feel like that's like the ultimate physical preparation for birth. It's just the fact that you've already given birth. your body's done it before. So I was not as physically active with the second, and things moved along and went half as, it took half as long, even though I had stalled labor too. So as far as preparing mentally, yoga is also great for that. I will link down below the yoga DVD that I used because I swear by it. It's great for physical and mental preparation for childbirth. Reading, YouTube, just hearing about natural birth is just a great way. Also, positive visualization is something that I did kind of by accident. I just happened to be someone that fantasized about childbirth, which is weird, kind of like my wedding day. Like, I fantasize about childbirth as well. I picture it going essentially well in the way I want it to go, but again, you have to be careful with this. This is not about controlling and focusing too much on this, and this has to happen. But positive visualization can be a very effective tool. If you go into something afraid and thinking something bad's going to happen, it probably will. So if you think positive about it and try to release that fear, that really helps, I believe, or it helped me. Also, so back to this idea of pain and preparing mentally. I want to encourage you, but I also don't want to sugarcoat it, because I don't think it is wise to hide from and ignore the pain that comes along with childbirth. I think it is more helpful to just accept that, yes, this is going to hurt very, very badly. But then once you accept that, you can move forward and, okay, how am I going to handle it when I experience it? Because if you go into it just not having thought about that at all, you can get blindsided and then maybe not be able to handle it as well. Just like anything in life, it's like studying for a test or something like that. So just to kind of accept and embrace the fact that you're going to have pain, and then do whatever you can to figure out what you're going to do to handle the pain when it happens. Labor and delivery classes, I did not do any of those. That was just a very personal decision for me. I didn't really feel a burning desire or need to go, just because I did do so much reading and studying on my own. I felt like that was sufficient. Another thing too, as far as like preparing mentally, you have to trust and know and believe that your body was biologically programmed to give birth. This is natural. This is normal. When you go into labor, you're not sick. You're not, in most cases, you're not dying. You're not like always in need of medical attention. It's not some emergency that you need to like save yourself from. This is supposed to happen. This is normal. So to trust your body in that and know that even if you don't really know what's going on, your body is going to do the thing. Your body is going to have the baby. Even if you've never had any coaching, you will know when it's time to push. You will have that urge. It's hard to explain, but you just know. You can feel it. Your body will do it whether you want it to or not, including pushing. I had that experience especially with my second. They didn't want me to start pushing yet. They didn't think it was time. But I'm like, I need to push. I physically cannot stop my body from pushing, and sure enough, it was just doing the thing it needed to do to get the baby out. So have faith in your body. Obviously, there are exceptions and special cases and exceptions to every rule. Once you're in the hospital, actually in labor, I will say too, if you can, labor at home as long as you can. Just because it's you're in your comfort zone, you're more free to just do what feels right. And if you can stay home as long as you can, less time in the hospital, in my opinion, is better. But obviously, if this is your 4th, 5th, 6th kid, they come faster and faster. You have to be aware of that. And if you just feel like it's time to go, then go. But for me, it helped to stay at home as long as I could. With Ivy mainly, I'm referring to Ember. I was there for the whole thing because it was my first and I didn't know what was happening. So I ended up getting there right for the beginning of it. So once you're in the hospital, though, the key is to keep moving as much as you can, whether you're walking, leaning on your husband, standing up, or swaying your hips, or whatever. Try to be up, walking around, just not sitting on that bed and not moving. Movement is key. At hospitals, as far as I know, they should all have labor balls, so you can ask for that. I use that at both hospitals with both girls. You can ask for a labor ball, they'll bring it in. Just try to just not be on that bed unless you absolutely have to be. Towards the end, though, for me, there was a point where I could not get out of bed. I was in too much pain. I feel like if maybe I'd had a midwife, things would have played out a little different. They would have helped me more with moving around, but being that I was in the hospital, I kind of just ended up in the bed towards the end. But for sure, as long as you can, move around as much as you can. Request dim lighting. Most hospitals should be okay with this. Just helps when it is time for the baby to actually come out with both. They did turn on this just like really bright light. I mean, it makes sense. They need to see what they're doing and things like that. But during labor, just helps to kind of keep a calm atmosphere. Sip water. So like I said, if you don't want the IV like me, definitely it's even more important to sip water, just to, you're breathing, your mouth gets dry, you're thirsty, you need to stay hydrated. So sipping water is something that I did with both. I was not hungry whatsoever. I've heard stories of some people who want to eat during labor, but for me, when you're in pain like that, I just was not hungry. There was no appetite there whatsoever, so I don't really have any suggestions on that. I don't think they let you eat much in the hospital anyways, aside from popsicles. They did offer me popsicles and things like that, and ice chips, but the key is they don't want you to have substantial food in your stomach in case you get sick or whatever. So sipping water. Things I would do if we have more kids that I did not do with these that I think would be helpful would be to look into meditation and calming music. With earbuds, you can get relaxing, meditative, calming music, and I would look into that a little bit more. I think that could be very, very helpful, especially if you're in a hospital and just, you don't necessarily like the atmosphere that you're in. And also essential oils. Again, if we have more, that's something I would definitely look into, is how you can use essential oils in childbirth to help with pain or calming or whatever. So those are my suggestions that I have not tried, but I will if we have more.